Welcome to the virtual tour of the Billion Oyster Project. We will be covering a few of our sites, such as Governor's Island, Red Hook Terminals, Brooklyn Navy Yard Wallabout Basin, and our Williamsburg Field Station. The Billion Oyster Project headquarters is located on Governor's Island. We have to take a ferry to get to the island every day. We have a few facilities located on the island, represented on this map by shells. Building 107, our Development and Communications Office, our Office and Aquaculture Lab at the Mass Center, Exhibit House, and Shell Pile. We'll start by having a look at the Office and Aquaculture Lab. This is our office. It's located right on the waterfront. The office is also co-located in the New York Harbor School building. In this building, students learn professional diving, vessel operations, marine systems tech, and aquaculture. This is the Aquaculture Lab, where our oysters journey begins. When we spawn our oysters on our own, we must collect adult oysters for reproduction. These oysters can be collected from our reef sites around New York Harbor, such as Bush Terminal Park, Patagat Basin, Jamaica Bay, Head of Bay, etc. However, sometimes due to the scale of the projects, we must purchase larvae from oyster farms. They will arrive as shown here in this video. Whether we're purchasing larvae or spawning them on our own, they are always eastern oysters. After cleaning the oysters, they are placed in these conditioning tanks. As the name implies, we condition the adult oysters for reproduction. Oysters can reach sexual maturity at about 2 or 3 years old. This is also when the male oyster can change genders to become a female. These tanks allow us to manipulate the water temperature so it mimics the slow increase of water temp towards the summer when they reproduce. We must also feed the oysters plenty of algae. In the hatchery, aquaculture students grow 5 types of algae that are nutritionally beneficial to the oysters. Growing algae is very tricky and crashes often. Therefore, all the equipment, these large cylinders included, must be bleached and cleaned before inoculation. Algae starts in test tubes, then is moved to Erlenmeyer flask. From there, the flasks are moved to carboys. Notice the airlines that are providing oxygen to all the algae. We also have an industrial plankton machine. This grows algae on an industrial level and creates a paste. This paste is then mixed with water to feed all the oysters. After the oysters are conditioned, well fed, and the water temperature is warm enough, they will be moved to a spawning tray. It is a very shallow tray, and the water is warm and stagnant to stimulate spawning so the oyster egg and sperm can meet in the water column above the oysters. Oyster sperm looks like a jet, whereas oyster eggs are emitted as a cloud. Here, you can see some oyster eggs under a microscope. In nature, the water currents can make it very difficult for the egg and sperm to find each other and eventually make larvae. The larva is the only swimming stage of an oyster's life. They have one small foot that allows them to swim and seek shell substrate. They can settle on anything hard but prefer calcium carbonate. Next, the larva is placed into these large conicals. The shape prevents the larva from sticking to the walls. They will stay in these conicals for about 2 or 3 weeks. The harbor water is pulled directly from the harbor and filtered before being used in the tanks. These 3 black filters have filter socks with different micron levels to capture any toxins, bacteria, or anything that shouldn't be in the water. After the water is filtered, it is held in these head tanks to use in the lab. Next, we prepare these big blue tanks. They are filled with bags of blank oyster shell. Each tank can hold up to 200 bags of blank oyster shell. Next, we're going to take a look at our shell pile. Our shell pile is located south of our office. These shells at our shell pile come from partnering restaurants. After restaurant goers eat their oysters, they are collected and brought over. These shells stay at our shell pile for a year prior to use. The sun, rain, and snow remove any bacteria or diseases that might be present on our oyster shells. The shells are then put into bags by volunteers. We have been trying to shift away from plastic bags towards coconut bags or cellulose fiber bags. Next, we prepare the oyster larvae. We'll remove them from the conicals and we'll have them ready to go.
Hello, babies. Hello, hello, hello. So 7.6 mil. Ew. No big deal.
There are millions of oysters in this photo. We release the larva onto the shells. The larva will swim around in the water until it settles onto a shell. At first, we see hundreds of oysters spat, or larva that is attached to a shell. Later, we see 10 to 20 oysters growing on each shell. When they are about the size of a chili flake, we conduct spat counts, where we count how many oysters have attached to each shell. When they grow too large for the aquaculture lab to supply enough algae for the growing spat, we'll move them into remote set tanks. Next, you'll see one type of remote set tank we use here on Governor's Island. These tanks are filled with water directly from the harbor. This is to condition the baby oysters or spat. The direct harbor water also allows us to stop feeding the oysters the aquaculture-grown algae. They still have air pumped to keep the dissolved oxygen levels high. The tanks are often covered in styrofoam to keep the water warm. Across the Buttermilk Channel in Red Hook, Brooklyn, we have a different type of remote set tank. At this location, we skip the bag shell stage and place the blank shell from the shell pile directly into a structure that they will be deployed in. These structures include gabions, oyster files, and a few others. Our hatchery tech, Ben, will explain more details about this site.
This is what the top of the tanks look like. Because it's empty, you can see the structures in the tank. So these are all files for community reefs stacked on top of gabions down here.
After some time in the remote set tanks, the oysters are moved to our eco-dock or our other nurseries. Underneath all the grates, we house thousands of oysters, which we use for different installations. Each tray is filled with bags of live oyster spat. Then they are stacked and hung. Older oysters will be moved to our Brooklyn Navy Yard Wallabout Basin floating nursery. Here, you can see some vessel operations and aquaculture students installing the stacks. We have a few nurseries around the harbor. One is located at SUNY Maritime in the Bronx, originally installed in 2019. Another one is located at 115 Marina in Brooklyn Bridge Park. These structures are called SEPA cages, installed in 2020. And lastly, one of our oldest nurseries is at Richmond County Yacht Club on Staten Island in Great Kills Harbor, installed as early as 2016. We have many, many stacks. For this reason, we often need volunteer help. They help by culling through the oysters to see how well the oysters are growing and see what kind of critters we find at each of these sites. Later, our oysters will be deployed in our harbor in different structures. We have bag shell reefs like this one at Lemon Creek Lagoon, Staten Island. Oyster research stations, which are adopted and monitored by schools, community groups, and community scientists.
Those oysters.
Can I take your picture?
Yeah.
Smile.
Gabions, which are 2-foot by 2-foot structures, filled with blank oyster shell, deployed in 2018 by the Tappan Zee Bridge. Larger gabions, like the one you saw at Red Hook earlier. These went into Soundview in the Bronx. Larger gabions such as these can also be found at Brooklyn Bridge Park. For example, these were installed in 2021. As well as at Gansevoort Peninsula on the west side of Manhattan. Also at Gansevoort, you could find another structure called a reef ball. These are made of eco-concrete. Eco-concrete is offset by larger aggregate or large rocks, thus using less concrete. This helps make the surface area more suitable for oysters by increasing surface area and also reduces the carbon footprint of the material. You can see that the reef balls installed in just June 2022 are already thriving in their new home. Next, we have community reefs. Community reefs are oyster reefs that are designed with the community monitoring in mind. During low tide, structures are pulled from the water and brought to the shore during programming. These include various structures such as community gabion reefs, community bagshell reefs, and community cabinet. The community cabinets and gabions, as shown here, have removable files that allow us to bring the oysters to the shore for monitoring with community groups, stewards, and school groups. Eventually, the oyster spat we install grow into these beautiful structures and reefs. We monitor the oysters, and we'll always try to invite the community to join us. Next, we'll visit our Williamsburg field station. This new water quality lab along the Domino Park waterfront, which opened in 2020, is a site where Billion Oyster Projects hosts educational programming, professional learning events, and run a water quality lab where volunteers drop off their samples from around New York Harbor. Using an EPA-approved testing method called IDEX Entero Alert, we are able to identify the amount of Enterococcus bacteria in each sample. Enterococcus is most widely used as fecal indicator bacteria. New York City has something called a combined sewer system. This means during dry weather, sewage from residents and commercial buildings will be sent to a sewage treatment center before being treated and released back into the harbor, as indicated in the graphic here. However, on a day when it rains as little as 1/10 of an inch or more, the rain can trigger a combined sewer overflow. This means that instead of going to a sewage treatment center, the sewage water from the buildings, such as your shower, dishwasher, laundry, toilet, etc., will be combined with the rain in the sewer drains and expelled directly into New York Harbor untreated. Seen here at the mouth of Newtown Creek in September 2021 is evidence of a CSO after Hurricane Ida. During a CSO event, the rain will wash the trash, oil, and other residues found on the streets through the drains directly into the harbor. An estimated 27 billion gallons of combined sewer and stormwater are discharged into New York Harbor every year on the side of New York. New Jersey contributes a similar amount. There are about 500 outflows such as these scattered around New York Harbor and can be found wherever you see one of these little green signs. Harbor water samples are collected every Thursday morning during the recreational boating season from May to October. We and 8 other partnering programs sample the water at more than 70 sites around the harbor, most of them access points for boaters and fishermen. At the lab in our field station on Kent Avenue in Williamsburg, we process 25 to 30 samples a week. Staff and volunteers collect 10 milliliter samples of water from the sites around New York Harbor and deliver them to the labs. The labs will process the samples using a reagent and incubate them for 24 hours. Per the New York City Department of Health, if counts found at a city bathing beach are higher than 34 colonies per 100 milliliters, it could warrant a swim advisory, shown here in our results in yellow. Anything over 104 could warrant a beach closure, shown here in red. Results are published on our website on Fridays. You're always welcome to come and visit the field station on Thursdays and Fridays. We hope you enjoyed this virtual tour of the Billion Oyster Project facilities. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out the Billion Oyster Project's website for more information.